Good morning and welcome to today's FS Club webinar on the cost of school bullying. As most of us have likely experienced, school bullying has existed since formal education began and for a long time was seen as part and parcel of the school experience, along with the teacher's cane, which I'm sure a few older members of our audience remember today not too fondly. However, over the last 50 years, there's been a considerable amount of research on bullying, and our understanding of it in relation to social norms has increased. Along with the emotional and developmental impact of bullying on individuals, we are recently coming to see that there's also an economic cost, which we will be exploring today with James O'Higgins Norman. James is a clinical sociologist at Dublin City University, where he holds a prestigious UNESCO chair on bullying and cyberbullying. His research on bullying spans almost 30 years, during which time he has contributed to international and national policy on bullying in educational settings. He's an author and co-author of over 100 publications on bullying and online safety, and is lead researcher on several EU government and industry-funded research projects. So he's incredibly well placed to speak with us today on this important topic. Now, before I hand over to you, James, the usual brief housekeeping points from me. I'm Charlotte Dorbrashley, if I haven't met you yet online or virtually, and I manage the FS Club here at ZN. I'd like to warmly acknowledge our very generous sponsors who enable us to continue to bring you a wide range of thought-provoking content across finance, technology, and economics, and everything that relates to that. As usual, the slides are available on our website and in the chat box. We'll record this session and it will be available to watch on our website and YouTube channel within 48 hours. We'll also be holding a 20-minute Q&A session, so please use the GoToWebinar chat facility to send your questions into me, and then I can feed them into the conversation with James. Now, it's my pleasure to hand over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share with you today my learning in this area and to be with you all today. So thank you very much for that. So as Charlotte said there, my name is James O'Higgins Norman, and I'm the UNESCO Chair on Bullying and Cyberbullying at Dublin City University, where I've been working for over 25 years on research and education on bullying in the workplace, online, and in schools and in colleges. So the centre that I work in has existed in one form or another for the guts of 30 years, and we are probably the only dedicated centre in the world to research and education on bullying specifically in all its forms, whether it takes place online or offline. So maybe we'll change slide there now, please, Sasha. And I just think it's good to start our discussion today clarifying what we mean by bullying, because the word bullying is used a lot in social discourse, and but when I speak about it and when educationalists speak about it and policy speaks about it in schools and in colleges, we have very definitive notions in mind. So the first kind of I suppose fixed idea of what bullying is and the definition of bullying came in the 1970s from Dan Alveus, who was working in Norway and Sweden. And he defined bullying, school bullying, as unwanted aggressive behavior that is repeated over time and involves an imbalance of power or strength. This is a very succinct definition, and it actually has been established for a long time, and it has been used as the basis of most research and policy in this area for pretty much the guts of the last 45 or 50 years. However, over the last 15 years or so, increasingly bullying has been seen as much more complex than that which Dan Alveus recognized in the 70s, and particularly with the onset of social media, we've recognized that there's a need for us to change our understanding of bullying and to delve a bit more deeper into it. So the understanding of bullying that we have today is a little bit different. We talk about it now as a damaging social process. So it's not just an act, an aggressive act or a once-off act, but it's part of a social process that's damaging. And it's characterized by an imbalance of power. So usually the person who is engaging in the bullying behavior experiences themselves to be more powerful than the person that they are bullying against, the target of their behavior. typical, I suppose, stereotypical understanding of that would be that the person engaged in the bullying is physically bigger or taller, stronger than the person that they're targeting. But that's a stereotype, and while there can be some truth in it, power can be experienced in many other ways. And one of the things that we realized in recent times in research is that that power sometimes comes from societal norms. I may belong to an in-group that is validated more by society than the person that I'm targeting. So bullying is a social process very much linked to societal and institutional norms. And I'll say a bit more about that later in terms of who are the people who are often bullied in society. The behavior is always repeated, or there's a threat of repetition. So a once-off act is never bullying. But if that act, if the target of that act believes that it can be repeated, well, then it may have the effect of being repeated without actually being repeated. And certainly, if something is posted online, we usually will say, well, even if it's only posted once, it's out there on the internet forever. And so the impact of it is as if it's being repeated all the time. So repetition can be repetition, or it can be the threat or the belief that something can be repeated. And of course, it's unwanted interpersonal behavior. So it's a negative interaction between the person who experienced themselves as more powerful, and it's underpinned by these societal norms and hierarchies among students or school personnel. And the impact of it is that it causes physical, social, or emotional harm to the target who is being bullied, but also the group they belong to, and even the wider school community. So bullying in itself is never just about the person who is bullying and the person who is being bullied. And another thing to keep in mind as well is that we used to talk maybe 10 years ago about bullying and cyberbullying. And we would talk even sometimes in terms of traditional bullying, meaning bullying that happens offline, old-fashioned kind of schoolyard bullying, and that cyberbullying was this other phenomenon that had developed alongside the internet and social media. But the research now shows that it's very clear actually, that some studies say 99%, some say 97% of those who are bullied online are also bullied by the same person or group offline. So what we've realized in recent years is that bullying, like the rest of our lives today, is actually a blended experience. So when we talk about bullying now, we mean bullying that is happening everywhere, online and offline, and we don't need to treat those as two separate realities anymore. So we go to the next slide. We can have a look at how big this problem is. And globally, about 1/3 of children experience bullying every year. So that's a huge proportion of those children who go to school across this globe every year. If you think about the number of children globally who were infected with COVID during the pandemic, it would not be as high. These are pandemic proportions of children every day going to school, 1/3 of whom are experiencing bullying. And when every parent sends their child to school, whether it's in Saharan Africa, whether it's in downtown Manhattan, or whether it's in the city of London, the parent expects and hopes that their child will be happy and safe and will be able to fulfill their potential. And bullying undermines that. And it's the last thing that any parent expects or anticipates when they pack their kid off to school in the morning. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see a little bit more in terms of the comparisons of the rate of bullying around the world. So I've said it's 1/3 of the entire global population. If we just see how that sizes up around the world, you can see on that slide that the rate of bullying, the rate of children who are bullied is 25% in Europe. So that's a bit lower than the global average. It's about the same in the Caribbean, and it's also much higher. It's 41% in the Middle East. And if we want to get more specific about it, and in terms of Europe, England and Wales is higher than the European average. You're looking at about 32% of children report being bullied in England and Wales every year. If we look at Scotland, it's higher again, it's 34%. Northern Ireland is at 41%. And here in the Republic of Ireland, it's the lowest in the British Isles. We're between 17 and 22%. So while the overall European average is about 25%, the figure for the UK, the stats for the UK are actually quite worrying because we seem to be higher than the European average, particularly in Northern Ireland. And I have some ideas about why that might be. If we just look at the next slide and we get some more comparisons from around the globe, what we see is that Central Africa is a bit lower, it's at 22%. South America is 30%. North America, including the USA and Canada, is 42%, and Sub-Saharan Africa is 48%. So we might ask ourselves, why is it higher in some countries than in others? Well, identity is something that's very much linked to bullying behaviour. So if we think about a society like Northern Ireland, where identity has been really important for communities up there, you can understand when I was saying earlier on about a social process underpinned by societal norms, how bullying might be a bigger challenge in schools in a society where identity and badges and flags and tribal cultures are important. If we go to the next slide, and we just look there very specifically, then the global figure is 30.4% of girls and 34.8% of boys in 13 to 15 years are bullied. Boys are more likely to be bullied in the Middle East, North America, and the Pacific region, whereas girls are more likely to be bullied in Europe and in North America. So in looking at that and the stats around that, the newer definition of bullying would cause us to say, well, what are the underpinning values and norms in society that might be animating that bullying behavior? What is the position of girls in Europe and North America, and of females, and their place in society, and how is that being negotiated and lived out in modern society in the US and in Europe? And boys are more likely than in other countries to be bullied in other parts of the world, and maybe that's linked to notions of masculinity in those parts of the world as well, and what's considered to be appropriate behavior for males and what isn't. All of this goes back to those underpinning social norms that influence bullying behavior. So if we go to the next slide then, please, we'll look at that a little bit more. So cultural attitudes explain some of the differences between the different regions, and also social dynamics. So, for example, if we see that the UK, say England and Wales, or the UK generally, has higher rates of bullying than, say, the south of Ireland or other European countries, we need to ask ourselves then what's going on in society in the UK at the moment. And we might find some of the answers there in some of the, I suppose, some of the polarization in society and how that might impact on families and communities and children in schools. And the social dynamics around that are really important for helping us to understand why bullying might be that bit higher in the UK than it might be somewhere else. The rise of individualism, there's more mistrust in society, mistrust of people who are different, mistrust of people from outside of our society and outside of our community, mistrust of authority. And then also this idea, which is particularly worrying for us among young males now, is this idea of the strongman mentality. The so-called Andrew Tate effect on social media. What's considered to be appropriate behavior, appropriate for and making us for males, and for that kind of heroic masculinity that might be linked to negative behaviors. So there's lots of questions around that are worth exploring and looking at. But also the way schools address and report instances of bullying in different countries and different regions is really important as well, for giving us a higher rate of bullying in place than somewhere else. So some countries are really good at naming bullying and reporting it, so their stats would be higher. It doesn't necessarily mean that those countries are not caring or doing something about bullying, but they might just be really good at counting and reporting bullying figures, and they may not be so good in other places. And then also the socioeconomic differences are really important. The data across the globe and across our own societies in the UK and Europe and in North America show that there's a positive association between low affluence and more risk to being bullied. The poorer people are, the more likely they are to experience bullying in schools. And that's concerning as well, because We know that as our societies have become richer and more and there's more wealth in our societies, the gap between those who have and those who haven't has got much wider. And so part of that experience is that those in the lower socioeconomic groups are more likely to experience bullying. So this is beginning to hint for us at the cost of bullying at a human and at an economic level, and how that might present a challenge for us. So maybe let's have a look at who is bullied. And the research is really interesting around this across the globe. All of the research has been done in every country that I'm aware of, research I've done myself over the years. The same reasons are reported why people are bullied. Physical appearance is the number one reason why a child in a school might be bullied by somebody else. So that might be anything from a child might be identified by another child as being too skinny or obese, too tall or too short. It might be that they're not wearing the same clothes as maybe most of their classmates are in school. It might be that their idea of style and fashion might be out of sync with their peer group. But the way a person looks has been identified globally as the number one reason why a person might be targeted for bullying. Does that mean then that person should change themselves to fit in? I don't think so. I think what it means is that there's a lack of tolerance for diversity in our education systems, and that we need to do some work on that. The second reason why, the most common reason why somebody might be bullied, is to do with their race and ethnicity. And we've just finished a 4-year study across Europe, funded by the European Union, on migration and bullying. And regardless of the reason why somebody migrates, maybe it's to start a new job, maybe it's as a legal immigrant, or maybe it's as an asylum seeker, whatever it might be, issues around race and ethnicity are always linked to that. And it makes children from those families more likely to be bullied than those who are identified as being from the host community. And so that's worrying for us as we look at the societies we live in today and how mixed they are. But yet there can sometimes be a power dynamic between those who are identified as being part of the host community and those who are identified as being either immigrants, or maybe they're part of the host community and their family have been for generations, but their race and their ethnicity isn't identified as being central to that host community in a way that maybe another race or identity might be. The next most common reason why somebody might be identified or picked out to be bullied in a school is that they come from a poorer family. So this links to physical appearance, it also links to race and ethnicity, but it also can be to do with economic wealth. So children who come to a school and don't have clothes that are as expensive as others, or maybe because the child doesn't have the means to participate in their peer group the way others might have because of their economic means, they may stand out more. I was talking to a school this week where a child wasn't able to access the books and the uniform that the school required because the money wasn't at home for that due to other issues at home. And that child was experiencing bullying because they were from a poorer family and weren't able to fit in with kids in their school who were who had more wealth behind them. As I said already, migrant children then come next on the list, but a migrant child may have an issue of race and physical appearance. So these are not necessarily discrete from each other, but this is the order in which they're ranked in the research. And then those who are gender non-conforming, so that might be children who identify from a minority sexual orientation, or increasingly we're finding children in schools today who are talking about having a fluid identity, or experimenting with their identity, and whatever the causes for that, the fact that they do that may make them stand out and be more likely to be bullied. So really, if you sum all that up in terms of who is likely to be bullied, those who are likely to be bullied are actually those who appear to be different in some way, and that holds a mirror up to us and to our education systems around to what extent are we actually promoting inclusion and acceptance of diversity and tolerance in our education systems. So we might move to the next slide, please. So the detrimental effects on people arising from being bullied and also arising from engaging in bullying behavior, because the research shows that bullying can be have long-term negative effects on those who are targeted, but also if you engage in bullying, long-term the effects can be quite negative for you as well, but not always. So we find that children who are bullied experience greater feelings of insecurity when they're at school, because they're waiting for the next attack coming at them. They're on standby the whole time, wondering how are they going to be treated by this person who's bullying them. That they will have long-term, as a result of that, they may have emotional and mental health issues. Their physical health can then be affected because maybe they're less likely to participate in sports or go out or take a route to school where they might meet the person who's bullying them, so they might be more likely to go by car and ask for a lift rather than expose themselves and feel vulnerable on the way to school. Long-term in life, those who are engaged in bullying behavior experience higher levels of stress and anxiety and depression. All of this is linked to low self-esteem, in extreme cases, psychosis, suicidal ideation, actual suicide. All of this, these can be factors long-term that impact on people who engage in bullying behavior or who experience bullying. And all of that is linked to overall reduced educational achievement. This is where the economic side kicks in. If children are not doing well in school, then because school is usually the gateway to social progress, economic progress, career progress, if you leave school early or you leave school with poorer educational achievements, it's going to be harder for you to contribute to society at a social level, but also at an economic level. And that has to be of concern to all of us. Now, it's important to say that the research also shows that if a child is bullied, that if they get immediate support and if they have a whole load of other kind of resilience tools in their bag and they're coming from a fairly secure background, in a matter of days and weeks, they can overcome the negative effects with that support and move on with their life. The, of course, key to that is that the bullying stops. And for the bullying to stop, often what's needed is for authoritative response from the adults in that child's world. So we move to the next slide, please. So people, as I say, often separate out what they call cyberbullying and offline bullying. I prefer to talk about it being bullying online and offline. We look at online bullying and the impact on mental health. Of course, it's not that that online bullying or cyberbullying it has the same effect or is expressed in the same way as offline bullying. Usually the person is being bullied by someone online and offline. But there are also, of course, additional stressors and additional problems. And we know from our own research here at Dublin City University that there are a number of aspects to situations that actually will increase the negative impact on a child's mental health if they're bullied online. And one of those things is gender. Females are more likely to have negative impact on their mental health than males are. And we think the reason for this is that the way that female children use social media is not the same as males. Females will invest more in social media than males will. What we find is that a female will set up a social media profile that's like kind of a window into their world. It very much represents them. And so if something is criticized or any negativity comes in through that social media account or whatever, it seems to hurt at a deeper level. Whereas the males, this is where I'm generalizing here between males and females. Not all males are the same, not all females are the same, but generally speaking, males tend to detach themselves more from their social media and not be not as upset and not as experience negative impact on their mental health as much as females. But it depends very much on the case and the form that the online bullying takes. Existing friendship qualities are really important. If a child has good friendships in their life, it doesn't have to be a lot, but has good solid friendships, that is seen as an inhibitor to negative mental health impact. And then finally, if they've been previously involved in some form of online bullying, then the repeated nature of that and being involved in it again has a compounding factor on their mental health issues, and that can be quite negative as well. So there is, when I say cyberbullying and bullying are all part of the same blended experience, there are aspects to being bullied online that can be quite negative on a child's mental health. So moving to the next slide, please. So if we look at the wider society, the detrimental effects on wider society are that we may maintain dominant social processes and ideologies that are not good for everyone. So if we have a belief in a society that in some way males should have more power than females, and that's replicated in our bullying patterns at school, and that's not challenged, then we will maintain that ideology and the social processes around that unchecked, and that certainly in this part of the world would not be seen as something that we want to do. Bullying acts in a way like a kind of, some researchers talk about as a way of policing the boundaries of society, of normality in society. So whatever social norms are deemed to be acceptable, children tend to bully in a way that reflects those social norms. So as I said earlier on, if somebody appears different in some way, then when children bully that child, they are saying to that child, you're different, you're behaving in a way that society doesn't validate, and you either get back inside the tent or you continue to be punished for that. And also we're sending a message to everyone else who's observing this. Remember, the biggest bulk of people involved in bullying are the bystanders, and they're receiving a message about how they should behave if they want to avoid being punished in this way for transgressing the boundaries, what seems to be transgressing the boundaries of society. So it's really important that we don't that we promote inclusion and diversity in our schools and tolerance in order to make our society richer in terms of culture, more points of view, and develop a critical mass of different ways of thinking about things, so that we will be able to have a healthier and a more productive society. We know research has shown us already, particularly in the US, that in societies where more extreme politicians on the right are elected and hold power, levels of bullying increase. And that's no surprise, because what's happening there is the children are receiving a tacit permission from those in authority in society to behave in a certain way. So that can be worrying. And so we need to realize that the bullying that's happening in a school is directly linked to the values of the community that school is located in and the societal norms that underpin that. So we move to the next slide, and please, thank you very much. We'll now look at the economic cost. And one study in in Sweden found that in 1 year, 2022, they counted that 140,000 children were bullied across the school system. And long term, 14,000 of those children would require specific interventions from public services, be that hospitalization, psychotherapy, increased visits to the GP, medical and emotional supports, and so on. Also, then, as a consequence of all that, healthcare and other types of care that were needed, those individuals over a 30-year period would either not work or miss a lot of work or be less productive at work. And the actuarial estimates were that would cost over a 30-year period 4.1 billion euro to the economy. So it's a really serious impact. When you think about that child who's been bullied in the classroom, the context in which that happens, the societal and economic factors around that, there is a real cost to the individual, to the community, and to society and the economy. And if we go to the next slide, and we just go to another part of the world, we can look at the data from Australia on this. And what we find in Australia, 8% of those who suffer with anxiety disorders as adults report that they were bullied as children at school. 11% of those who suffer with depressive disorders as adults have reported that they were bullied at school. And they estimate that that is costing annually 147 million dollars, Australian dollars, for the treatment of anxiety disorders among adults who were bullied as children. And in fact, in total in the healthcare system, the cost of health and non-health outcomes in Australia every year arising from bullying is about $763 million. So there is a real cost to the economy, there's a real cost to society, there's a real cost to communities and families and to the individual when bullying occurs and it's allowed to continue to occur. I think there might be one more slide then after that, please. So what can we do? Very quickly, what we can do is, my own slide up here, sorry. What we can do is, UNESCO has published a whole education approach to preventing and intervention on bullying, and there are a number of aspects to that. I don't have time to go into it now, but it basically calls for a whole society approach to tackling bullying. We deal with the individual case and what's happening there. We have to look at the context in which it takes place and what do we need to change there, and then the societal norms and the messages that we're sending from senior politicians, from government, from school leaders, and so on to the school. And I recommend that anyone who's interested in looking at what to do about bullying at a systemic level, we need to look at that whole education approach published by UNESCO. We need to ensure that our education system is rooted in education about diversity and inclusion. A difference is always a good thing, and that we find ways to be tolerant and to celebrate it. We have to set targets to reduce prevalence linked to wider societal norms. So if we find that most of the bullying that's happening in our schools is related to race or to gender, then there's something in our society that we need to start sending messages that this society values race, values differences in race, and values different genders or whatever it might be. We need to keep measuring the prevalence to ensure that we're auditing and monitoring the problem. And then we need to also fund anti-bullying programs in schools and in society that are evidence-based. It's really important that we move away from kind of ad hoc anti-bullying programs that are full of shiny bells and whistles, but are not underpinned by evidence. And they must focus on those social processes, not just on individual behavior. Finally, then if we want to skip ahead to the very last slide there, second last slide, Sasha, there's a link there to further help for anyone who wants to know about. That's it there. It's a guide for parents on bullying and cyberbullying that we produced in the research centre here in DCU. So thank you for your time and for inviting me to share very quickly with you about 30 years of research in half an hour. And I hope that people found that to be of some use.
Thank you very much, James. That was really fascinating. I particularly liked how you broke down the differences between gender and countries as well. Your last slide actually relates to this, but Clive's asked, isn't the problem the parents? If children are treated well and taught how to behave when young, bullying would be far less, I think he means less prevalent, so there should be more parent education and responsibility. I mean, I would say to that, I know obviously sadly there's a lot of child abuse and bullying that goes on from parents to their children, and they're likely to replicate that. But I mean, you don't need a license to have kids, so we can't really control parents, can we?
No, we can't, but we can try and educate them, through maybe public campaigns. And also, there are two levels to this. There's dealing with bullying that's happening right now, but there's also then changing some of those social processes that are linked to societal norms and providing education that hopefully in the long term will change society. So, and also at one end of the extreme continuum, there's an extreme at the one end of the continuum, which is like the pathological bully who has grown up in a home where aggression and abuse is the norm, and they repeat that out in the world. They're few enough. Most kids who engage in bullying behavior, it's out of some ignorance or some lack of knowledge or appreciation for difference, and they need to be educated around that. So the role of parents here is really important, but we need to support parents in whatever way we can.
Fantastic, thank you. Matthew's got an interesting question. He says, how can tolerance of differences that are not protected characteristics be promoted? For example, being good looking or ugly is not a protected characteristic, but it is the basis for a lot of bullying and unfair discrimination.
So that speaks to my point about kids who stand out as being different. And of course, we have the protected characteristics. So those differences are protected and people are very aware of them. But Matthew is right that, there's so many different, every individual human being is different, but some differences stand out, whether it's, somebody is seen as being very good at sports, or maybe very bad at sports, or maybe somebody's particularly good looking, or whatever it might be. So that's all about educating around difference. And it's down to teachers in classrooms, it's down to school leaders to celebrate difference and so on. Sometimes it needs very much a local individualized mediation with an ongoing problem. But other times we can have a wider campaign across the school or across society. But it comes back to that whole thing about those who are seen to be different or those who stand out in the school community for whatever reason. Any one of us could be bullied if we're seen to be different. And it's about education and taking the time to help children see that difference is good.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you're aware, but I mean, obviously now we talk a lot about how bullying has left the classroom and is also occurring when the child's at home at night with cyberbullying. So I learned recently that the Australian government has proposed a bill that's got support from both sides of the house. That's to ban social media for teenagers. That includes Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, because of so much of the bullying is on those social mediums. Do you think that's a sensible thing to do and that will have any
So
benefits?
there is a kind of a zeitgeist at the moment globally where governments are looking at these possibilities. And my concern is that no one is actually asking children and young people what their experience is and if they agree with these bans or not. We have done some research over the last 6 months on that very topic here at DCU, where we've asked children where phone bans are in place and where restrictions to social media are in place, how they're experiencing those bans. And it's a much more complex problem than just saying you're banning them from it, because there are so many positive things that children can access through their smartphone and through social media. And to remove those positive things from them today, I think is not a good thing. And I think if we say, okay, they can't access those things until they're 16, what happens when they're 16 if they haven't developed a digital resilience to actually be able to spot the problems and spot the issues that might occur online and be able to deal with them better? Children are really good at self-regulation if you give them the right kind of starting line. So, for example, parents used, in my day when I was growing up, we tended to walk everywhere in local communities. Your parent held your hand crossing the road and they taught you how to do that. And at a certain stage, they walked beside you as you cross the road, and at a certain stage, they allowed you to cross the road on your own. The danger was always there, but my resilience as a child growing up in terms of dealing with road traffic became stronger and became more responsive to the complexities of dangers that were on the road, and you dealt with motorways and different types of roads. I think we need to take the same kind of approach with children when it comes to social media. I think we need to look at the regulation of what content is out there, and that means dealing with the social media companies. But I think banning children from smartphones and banning children from accessing some social media is punishing the user, when we should be actually looking at who's in charge of what's actually available to them and regulating that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. We've had a few questions around teaching empathy, especially in the children that are bullying, and whether that's effective in supporting behavioural trains. So perhaps early on in the education system, as well as having arithmetic, you could have this sort of community building and empathy teaching. Do you know much about that?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and people often raise that with me a lot. So yes, we need to teach empathy as early as possible in life, and parents do that naturally at home, in the relationship they have most of the time. And when we come to school, we learn to understand the person sitting beside us in school and so on. But there are different types of empathy, and some of the research that I'm aware of shows that children who engage in bullying actually score really high on empathy scales. Because I have to be quite an empathetic person to understand how I'm hurting you and how it makes you feel. So it's not just empathy, it's a particular type of empathy that we have to teach. And I think that's really important. I know some of the research which say there are 4 types of empathy, so it's not all 4 that we would want to encourage, because bullies actually, children who bully are often very high in some types of empathy.
Mm. We have had a question from a parent who mentioned that their child was actually being bullied by a school headmaster, and other children were as well across other year groups, and it wasn't, complaining didn't seem to help the situation, and the child had suffered a lot of detrimental impacts from that. What's your advice to parents who are trying to deal with this?
I hope that that kind of experience is exceptional, but I have come across it, and if the most powerful person in the school is engaging in bullying behaviour, it's very difficult to go anywhere about that, because where do you go above the school principal? You can go to the governors who have put the principal in place there. So that's a very difficult case, but it is actually an issue for professional code of conduct. And if a principal or a teacher is engaging in bullying behaviour, we should actually think about that being something you would report to their professional body. And of course, in all cases of bullying, if you need to report it, you need to document. It doesn't have to be forensic, but you need to document a pattern. So it's just a list of all the times that something negative has happened, and have that evidence, and then document that and bring it to whoever the professional body is. In England and Wales, you used to have the teaching council. I don't know what part of the Department of Education there now would deal with that, but in Ireland we have a teaching council still, and that would be an issue for them. That's a matter of professional conduct, and I would be taking it beyond the school.
Thank you. We've had a lot of really interesting questions. I think we've just got time for one more, and this is a great one to end on. Lorraine has asked, if you had a magic wand that would eradicate bullying globally, what would you do with it first?
That's a really good question. I think what I would do is I would teach children from a very early age about difference, and how difference is a good thing. And there might be people who say, oh, that's a very woke answer. But we know from the research, it shows us that where children have a greater appreciation of difference, that actually they bully less. But that appreciation of difference doesn't just come from school. It has to come from families and parents as well. Most children don't really recognize differences in each other. They learn those differences from society. So if those differences are the currency of bullying, we need to go to those. And I suppose if I had the magic wand, I'd like a really senior politician in every single country to take on this cause and champion it. We're very lucky in Ireland, because our Minister for Education 3 or 4 years ago set up a national steering committee, and we developed a national action plan, and we are implementing that at the moment. And that might be part of the reason why our prevalence rate of bullying is a little bit lower than it is in the rest of the British Isles. But you need to have senior government leadership on this, because it's not just an individual school. We used to talk about whole school approaches to bullying, and then we realized that we're asking a lot of a school to just sort bullying out on their own. So now we talk about whole education or whole society approaches to bullying.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I think exactly like the school, the parents, and government. I'm not sure about the UK, but I know in New Zealand we have a minister for children, so that could be something that comes heavily under that remit. But we are at time now, so I thank you so much, James. It was a really, really interesting and lots of good, useful takeaways for all of us there. And thank you very much to our sponsors who enable us to continue to bring these webinars to you. And of course, to our audience for logging in and contributing such thoughtful questions. We have quite a few more webinars coming up on diverse themes. We've got one about the 2 financial markets, London and New York, tomorrow. And next week, we're looking at innovation in mental health, which could be discuss some of the similar things we've mentioned today. So I hope everyone has a great rest of the week. And thanks again, James. Goodbye.